All right, welcome to everybody. Is everybody alive? Everybody's alive. Good. Glad to hear it. Okay, we're making a lot of tracks. We're making progress. We're in the book of Joshua. My goal is to finish the book of Joshua, Judges, and Ruth before we go into the summer series, which begins in June. And you might remember it took me a whole year to just do Genesis. So we really have covered a lot of ground since that time. But Genesis is a very foundational book. So right now, we're studying the great book of Joshua. And we've had a couple of good lessons on it so far. And tonight, I'm going to present some things that will be very fascinating, I think. Some that are real familiar to you, and some maybe not quite as familiar, but there's very powerful lessons. So let's start off talking about this. Everybody in here, this is one of the foundational Bible stories that everybody hears when they're in Bible class, right? So the walls of Jericho fall down. So could somebody or a couple of people just kind of pipe up, tell me what happened at the fall of Jericho. What's the story in Scripture? Sarah, what happened? Okay, that's right. So let's think about this for a minute. Scott and I were talking about this the other day, and this is a really good point. Okay, so Joshua's a general, basically. He's a commander of an army. Okay, now, George is in the military. George, were you in the Army? The Marines, okay? He could come up here and teach this part. George, I'm not sure. I've never been in the military, but I'm pretty sure it's like this. JD, do you think this would be a good battle plan, George and JD? Do you think this would be a good battle plan? Hey, we're going to go into Iraq or, Iran or one of those hotbed places, and here's our plan. We're not going to take any weapons with us. We're going to have some guys blowing trumpets, and we're just going to walk around the town for a day, one time, and then we're going to go home and go to bed. And the second day, we're going to get up. Don't take any weapons with you, and we're just going to go, and we're going to walk around the town, and then we're going to go home and go to bed. And we're going to do that for 6 days. So, George, if your platoon leader, whatever you call him, your sergeant, whoever, says that, what do you think of George? Yeah, good luck. Yeah. JD, what would you think if that's the plan? Hey, man, what's the deal here? That's not the normal battle plan, right? And then they say, now on the seventh day, we're going to get up early. That resonates with military people, right? We'll get you out of bed early. And we're going to do a lot of PT today. We're going to walk around the whole town 7 times. And they're thinking, yeah, this is when we're going to get the battering rams out, the siege ramps, and all that stuff. He says, and then what we're going to do, we're going to blow the trumpets, and everybody's going to yell. And these giant walls, these were walls. Don't think about a 6-foot fence around your backyard. We're talking about walls that are 60, 80 feet high and wide enough for chariots to ride on. We're talking gigantic walls. We're going to do that. And these walls are going to fall down flat. And then all of you will go in there and take the city. So what would you be thinking? Pardon me? You're crazy. Do you think, the text doesn't say anywhere in the book of Joshua, but you know human nature. Do you think that while they're walking around, these soldiers, there's some muttering going on? You think there's some of that going on? Some muttering and some grumbling. I don't see anything happening. And can you imagine what the inhabitants of the city of Jericho are doing? They're probably looking over the walls going, what are they doing? Doesn't make any sense. And then what happened? They blew the trumpets, they yelled, and just like God said, the walls fell down flat. And they went in and they conquered the whole city. Is there any other details? Now, I paraphrased, along with several of you who offered some details. Anything else you think significant in this story that maybe we left out? Okay, there's Rahab. Rahab lived in the city wall, right? This is where there was a lot of coming and going, and her occupation was one where a bunch of men visited her home repeatedly, right? But God made a promise to her, or through Joshua, they made a promise to her. Remember the spies? She hid the spies and protected the spies. And what was the promise made to her? Yes, you'll be saved if you got to put out this rope. Remember? And when we see this rope, the soldiers will know, they'll be instructed ahead of time not to kill you. And of course that happened, and she was spared. So there's probably a lot of things we can learn from this, but just brainstorm for a second. What messages do you think God wants us to learn from this story that we apply to how we live our life today? Because you think about it, the Bible is a selective book, meaning not everything that happened was recorded, right? If everything that happened was recorded, you couldn't fit the Bible in this room. But these particular things are recorded for a reason. Not only because they happened, yes, they did happen, but He wants later generations, and that's us, He wants us to learn something from it. So what would some of those things be, you think?
Maybe that He answers our prayers and blesses us in unconventional ways.
Unconventional ways. Haven't you guys ever had God bless you in unconventional ways? I have. I remember one time, let me tell you what happened to me one time, a long time ago. I had just bought a brand new truck. I had never had a new truck, never had a truck ever in my life. And I just bought a brand new truck, brand new Toyota Tacoma. Not the one I have now, I just bought that one 2 years ago, but this is a long time ago. And not long after that, just a few months after that, I was proud of that and lost my job. So immediately, when something like that happens, my brain says we need to downsize everything, cut out all unnecessary expenses, live on as little as you possibly can until you regain employment. So the truck is 4 months old. Now, I don't know if we have any car dealers in here, how many times you bought and sold a car, but if you just have a truck that is 4 months old and you're going to go and trade it in, what's going to happen to you? Man, you're going to get smoked. You are going to take a bad loss. You're going to get soaked. But I'm praying to God, God, we need money. We need cash flow. Please help me get a good deal on this. So I go into this dealership. Laura's with me, and I have a notebook, and I have a bunch of stuff written down in it, figures and facts and all that. And they take it, and I'd kept it in pristine shape. It's only 4 months old. It's in pristine shape, very clean, not a ding on it, nothing. This guy goes to the back. You know, they always have to go talk to their manager, right? So he goes to the back, and he's back there, and he comes back out, and he goes, well, we can offer you $25,000 for it. Keep in mind, this is over 10 years ago. I only paid $20,000 for it. He didn't know that. And I didn't tell him either. I paid $20,000 for it. Brand new. I got a really good deal on it. I actually flew from where we were living in Alabama, flew to Atlanta because I found this great deal, and I caught a bus over to the dealership and bought this vehicle and drove it back. About a 5-hour drive back to where we lived. Great deal. So I'm getting $5,000 more for it than I paid for it. So what I don't want to do at the car dealership is jump up and down when he says that. So I played it real cool. I'm trying not to scream, and yell out loud. So I just kind of got my little notebook out and I looked in it and I started, and I said, okay, $5,000. How often does that happen? I don't know anybody that's ever happened to. But that makes the point. God does bless us a lot of times in very unconventional ways. That's the way God typically works. He does things in ways that are not normal. Now, Tanner, you had your hand up. You were going to make a comment too.
A lot of times when we go through our hardest on our journey, when we've had our hardest days, and when we want to quit and think it's all done, there's no hope, the victory is just right around the corner.
Exactly.
Persevere through it.
That's a good point.
Until the job gets done.
I hadn't thought of that. That's a good point. Because I bet these soldiers were like, man, this is fruitless. This is a waste of time. We're getting nowhere. All we're doing is walking around this town. And I bet on that last day, after they were after they were into the 7th time around, they're like, this is ridiculous. Nothing's going to happen. Sometimes victory is just right around the corner. We need to keep trusting God and keep following God. Because when God says something's going to happen, if we trust Him and obey Him, it's going to happen. No matter how unlikely it might look like that it's going to happen. Hey, anything else? Anything else y'all see from this story? Scott?
You know, right before that is where Joshua has the encounter with the commander of God's army in verse number 13. He looks over and he sees that guy and he says, "Are you for us or them?" And he says, "No, I'm the captain of God's army and I'm here now." And I'm pretty sure Joshua already had a plan to capture the city because he had already sent the spies in.
Right.
He was ready. So I think this is a really good example. The way to follow God is not to interject God into my plan, but Joshua gave up his plan and he took God's.
Yeah.
And there's a difference in putting God in my life and putting me in God's life.
Right. Because I'm sure, and I think what you're saying, and that's a good point, I'm sure Joshua's initial plan was not to march around the town, right? I doubt that was his plan. His plan was to, get out the battering rams and the siege rams to starve the city out, which they usually did, divert the water supply that was going, all those kind of things that they would typically do. But God gives him this plan, which sounds crazy, but he doesn't, good point, he does not say, well, how can I fit my plan into God's plan or God's plan into my plan? He completely abandons his plan. Even though God's plan doesn't sound very plausible, he says, well, this is what God says. I trust God. We need to learn to do that too. Good point.
Can we talk about the commander of the Lord's army?
Okay, what's your question?
Is it an angel? Is it Jesus?
Well, we don't know if it's certainly some kind of either an angelic being, or it could be. There are pre-incarnate visits of Jesus in the Old Testament. In fact, that story with Abraham, I pointed that out back in the book of Genesis. You remember that time the 3 visitors show up? And one of those, no doubt, is a pre-incarnate Jesus visiting. And also, you might remember in the book of Daniel, when they built this giant fire, you remember? Anybody who doesn't bow down and worship this giant idol is going to be thrown into the blazing fire. And you remember the 3 Hebrews whose names were? Get it right. It was not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That was not their names. Go look it up. Their names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were the names of false Babylonian gods that they gave to them. Anyway, I get off on that. They call him by his right name, by Daniel, rather than Belteshazzar, which his name was given to him. Anyway, we're not in the book of Daniel right now. Might get back to the book of Joshua. But my point is, when they threw them into the furnace of blazing fire, you remember, they looked in there, they looked in a porthole or something that they had, they looked in there, and they said, we don't just see 3 guys in there, there's 4 in there. And one of them is like a son of the gods. Most Hebrew scholars will say probably that was a pre-incarnate presence of Jesus with those 3 Hebrews in that fire.
But it even says to take off your sandals because the place where you're standing is holy.
Yeah, that sounds like some kind of divine being, doesn't it? Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, this is not just some normal guy. This is an angelic being or divine being. Okay, turn to Joshua chapter 6, verse 18. Just one verse that I want to read after the story of the fall of Jericho. It's a prelude to the very next story. Chapter 6, verse 18, he says, "But as for you, only keep yourselves from the things designated for destruction, so that you don't covet them, and take some of the designated things and turn the camp of Israel into something designated for destruction and bring disaster on it." In other words, when you go in and you destroy the city, there's going to be a bunch of nice things that are left over by the inhabitants of it. I don't want you to take any of those things. God gives him a command. So, how many of you remember the very next story? We just talked about the story of the Battle of Jericho. Do you remember the story of the Battle of Ai? Somebody tell me what about the town of Ai. What was it like? Wasn't very big. To use an analogy, if Jericho was like Dallas, Ai is like Scurry. Okay? No offense to Scurry people, right? This is a spot in the road. There's not very many people here at all. Okay? Now, little bitty town. I want to read something here. Turn to Joshua chapter 7, verse 1. Chapter 7, verse 1. The sons of Israel acted unfaithfully regarding the things designated for destruction. For Achan, who was the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, from the tribe of Judah, he took some of the designated things. Therefore, the anger of the Lord burned against the sons of Israel. Remember, we just read in chapter 6:18, God said, do not take anything from it. And now we find disobedience. God had been blessing them, but now we find blatant disobedience. Look down in verse 3. Then they returned to Joshua, and they said to him, do not have all the people go up. We're going to go up. We're going to take this town. We don't need to take the whole army, they're saying. Have only about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up and attack Ai. Don't trouble all the people there because they're so few. And so about 3,000 men from the people went up there, but they fled from the men of Ai, and the men of Ai struck and killed about 36 of them, pursued them from the gate as far as Shebarim, and struck them on the mountainside, and the hearts of the people melted and became like water. The Israelites have been promised by God, I'm going to go before you and I'm going to drive the people of the land out. There's even passages that say, I'm going to send hornets ahead of you and the hornets will drive them out. In other words, the reason you're going to be so successful against sometimes superior armies is because I'm with you. And I'm with you because you're with me. But now on this occasion, they have just defeated the city of Dallas, let's say, okay? They've just defeated this giant city, powerful city, big, thick walls. And then they go to scurry and they get whipped. That doesn't make any sense. What do you think's going on here? They disobeyed God. God's presence is not with them any longer. Look in chapter, down in verse 10. Chapter 7, verse 10. So the Lord said to Joshua, stand up. Why is it that you have fallen on your face? Israel has sinned, and they have also violated my covenant, which I commanded them. They have even taken some of the things designated for destruction. They have both stolen, kept it a secret. Furthermore, they have also put them among their own things. And then down in verse 24 to 26, then Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan, who was the son of Zerah. They took the silver, the robe, the bar of gold. Those are the things that he stole. His sons, his daughters, his oxen, his donkeys, his sheep, his tent, and all that belonged to him. And they brought them to the valley of Achor. And Joshua said, why have you brought disaster on us? The Lord will bring disaster on you this day. And all Israel stoned them with stones, and they burned them with fire, and after they had stoned them with stones. And then they erected over him a large heap of stones that stands to this day. And the Lord turned from the fierceness of his anger. Therefore, the name of that place has been called the Valley of Achor to this day. Is there anything in those verses that I just read that bother you? Now here's this person named Achan who disobeyed God. Is he the only one who's punished? Whole family, all his stuff, everything. Destroy it all. We want you to stone them all, completely get rid of them. Why do you think God says that? He's serious about what he says, and he doesn't want this evil influence to spread and to rise its head again. So he wants to get rid of the whole clan. He wants to get rid of all of them, and he's setting a precedent. God is serious about what he says. That's right. He has told them over and over and over again. That's a good point, Patsy. And how many of us, let's think about it in our own personal life. I bet everybody in here is of some age, at least. I'm being kind, right? Some of you aren't. Even JD's old enough to probably have experienced this, right? How many of us have experienced in our life You know, when I followed God and did what he said and followed what I know is right, man, things went well for me. And when I disobeyed this because of I saw something shiny like we see in this story right here, then things went south. How many of you experienced that? Man, I have.
Mike, to me, it's a pattern that we see throughout, that sin doesn't just affect the sinner, it affects other people.
That's right. It affected his whole family, his whole clan. And sin does that. It affects your whole network of people that you're around. It's not just one person, it's everybody. Those of us who are husbands and fathers, and those mothers and wives, we need to keep that in mind, the influence that we have on each other and the influence that we have on our kids. What we do affects our children, and not just right then, forever. Like, I know I'm not the only one in this room who divorce has affected your home. My wife and I, fortunately, have never been divorced, but I grew up in a home. My parents got divorced when I was in the 6th grade. And it didn't just affect us the year that it happened in 1976. I know I'm old. It has affected us from then on. That doesn't mean divorce is the unforgivable sin. Y'all know me better than that. You've heard me preach many times. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying it causes hardships, not just right then, and not just for the people guilty, but for, in our case, all 4 kids in our family. In our families, you know, it's causes a mess from then on. It's just far better, we've all experienced it, when we follow God's ways and do his will. Look in chapter 8, verse 1. Still in the book of Joshua, chapter 8, verse 1. Now the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not fear or be dismayed. Take all the people of war with you and arise and go up to Ai. See, I have handed over to you the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. You shall do to Ai and its king just as you did to Jericho and its king. You shall take only its spoils and its cattle as plunder for you, for yourselves. Set an ambush for the city behind it." And then look in verse 26 and 27 of chapter 8. "For Joshua did not withdraw his hand with which he reached out with the sword until he had utterly destroyed all the inhabitants of Ai. Israel took only the cattle and the spoils of that city as plunder for themselves, in accordance with the word of the Lord, which he had commanded Joshua." Now here's the question I want to ask. So why was it okay to take spoils and plunder and goods when they conquered the city of Ai, but it wasn't okay with Jericho? Why, Ronnie? Okay, Jericho's the first city, but that's what God said. I can't think of any other reason. One, he says, don't take any of these spoils. That was Jericho. They didn't do it, and it went, they had negative consequences. Then the other one, after they repent, after they do what God says and they stone the man and his family, then God says you can take the spoils. What's the reason? The only thing I can discover from my Bible study is because that's what God said. There are a lot of things that happen. How many of you have ever told your kids? They say, "Why, Mommy? Why, Daddy?" What's the answer? Because I said, right, we know, because I said so. Sometimes that actually is the answer. Sometimes I know it's a cop-out, right? Okay? I know. I know we can't think of anything else that's a cop-out. But sometimes it actually is a good reason. Sometimes they don't understand. If you tried to explain it to them, they don't get it. They're not capable. Their mental capacity is just not there yet. And you just have to say, "Because I said so. I know best. I'm looking out for you." That's what parents do. They're looking out for their kids. All good parents do. And sometimes you just need to trust God because he said so. We don't know all the reasons for it, but this is that he said. Okay, anybody see any other lasting principles here for our life from the Battle of Jericho and the Battle of Ai?
Could it also be a lesson in humility?
Be what, Casey?
Could it also be a lesson
Yeah.
And, you know, then God knowing that there was going to be another town after that. So,
Yeah.
you know, the more you gain, you know, it just,
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a good point because remember after they defeated Jericho, they're probably feeling real, you know, hey, look at us. And they say, oh, we don't need to take all of our guys to go to Ai. Let's just take a few because that's just a little scurry place. We can just go whip them easy, right? They weren't very humble at the time. They weren't depending upon God. I think there certainly is that lesson. Okay, good point. Anything else, John?
In our sermon, Ms. tells us men to shout, but we should always lift our voices in praise
Yeah.
and faith.
Yeah, when the walls fell down, he told them at the right time, shout, and the walls will fall down. And they did. And once again, obeyed what God said, and they all participated, which God wanted them to, and the walls fell down. Kerry?
It seems like it may also be they finally came around to God and obeying God when they went to AI, so then they got the reward of these spoils.
Yeah. Yeah, because they finally listened to him and trusted him. Okay. Okay. But they didn't do that, but they were listening to him and obeying him at Jericho, and he told them then, don't take any of the spoils. So I think it's just one of the, we don't know all the reasons. Just God said. God has his reason. Maybe he's testing them. And there are times he tests us, like, do you trust me enough to obey what I've said? Okay. Let me show y'all this. This is a map of the ancient world. You see Israel right here. There's Mount Sinai. The Israelites were down here in Egypt. Egypt, at the time, way back in the day, Egypt was the superpower of the world. And then over here to the east, you have the Assyrians and the Persians and the Babylonians, these great empires. These all took turns being the great superpower of the world. And there's a big desert over here. Israel's basically right on the coastline, but big desert surrounding it. And then, of course, over here, the Greeks in the 300s BC under Alexander the Great, they would arise to be the dominant empire in the world. And, of course, then you have the Roman Empire, which was a huge empire. They arose in the 100s BC and lasted, obviously, until the time of the New Testament and even beyond that. Now, here's the question, or let me just say it this way. Going back to the book of Genesis, God promised Abraham, he selected Abraham, remember? And he promised, I'm going to give you a land. I'm going to give you a certain piece of property, not only to you, but to your descendants. And what he's talking about this little sliver of land right here. Israel is a tiny little country. It's a little bitty country. Just to use some scale, the panhandle of Texas, just the panhandle, is way bigger than Israel. This is a small little country. So, the question is, why does God want them to have this particular piece of land? Let me ask you guys a question. Do we have any, I don't see Cody Brantley in here tonight. Is he here? There's Abby. Abby, but since you're the wife of Cody. In real estate, what are the three most important things when it comes to selling real estate? Location, 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 right? Would Cody say that? Yeah, he probably would. Okay. Location is very, very, very important in real estate. Why does God want them to have this particular piece of real estate? It's pretty obvious he does. God could have had the Israelites go anywhere he wanted in the world and drive out the people of that land. And he could have had them take that particular property. But God is very obvious when you read through the Bible. He wants them to have this piece of land. And he goes to great extents to drive the people out of that land, to empower them, to make sure that they take over and inhabit this piece of land. And if you think about it, this piece of land is really not the best piece of land in the world. There's far more fertile places of land they could have go. It's surrounded by desert. It's a real rocky piece of land. I mean, there are some nice pastures and so forth in it, but it's not the greatest piece of land in the world. It's very arid, surrounded by desert. Why did God want them to have that piece of land? Can anybody come up with a suggestion? Susan?
Could it be that it was not about the land, but it was about the people that lived there? Because, you know, at one time he told the Israelites, you weren't chosen because you earned it, you weren't chosen because you were so good. I chose you because they are so bad.
Yeah, now it certainly wasn't because the Israelites were so good, but it's plain when you read through Scripture. I mean, these people of the land were bad, but God wants this particular piece of land. Because there were people who were real bad people living in other parts of the world too, and he didn't have them go and drive them out. He wanted them to go right here. John?
This is a wild one. Kind of see it as a area as the Romans come across, it's going to be centered there. So to conquer more. But as Jesus died and he sends out his disciples, he's got all that area to go. East, background, all directions.
Okay, I think you're getting close. Now you probably noticed this yellow line here. That was an ancient road, which was one of the two main roads, another road called the King's Highway, but this one was called the Via Maris. It's like I-35, to use modern analogy. This is a major thoroughfare. They didn't have very many really good roads. This was a primary road, and it went right through Israel. It connected the Egyptian Empire to these empires over here to the east, and it was a road through which, if you wanted to go from here to there or also up to Europe, you had to go through Israel. Now, here's what I think is going on. God had called the Israelites. When he called Abraham, he called him, I want you guys to be a blessing to all nations. Remember he said, I'm going to make you a people and you're going to be blessed above all nations of the earth. And I have called you, he said over and over and over again in the Old Testament, I have called you to be a light to the nations. If you think about it, if you just look at this map for a minute, Israel is right in the center of all these empires. All of them. It's right in the middle of it. You have empires to the east, you have empires to the south, you have to get through to go over here to Europe to get to these empires, and for them to come travel this way, they had to go right through here. It's like this powerful little section, even though it's not much of a country in a lot of ways, but it's very, very important strategically. God wanted to put them right in the middle so that he could functionally have them be what he called them to be. God was calling them to live right in the collision of cultures, you might say, to bring about God's shalom and God's peace to the people. God has called us to do the same thing. Now, here's what I think the danger for us is, and I feel this too. Because we are in a collision of cultures in our country, and we are right now, aren't we? We have been for, a couple of decades, I would say. It used to be very different for some of you when you were growing up. Even for me, growing up in the 70s, culture was really different than it is now. We used to live in a culture that primarily, it wasn't perfect. I mean, there were still bad things going on. But our culture primarily supported Christian values. Those days are gone, brothers and sisters. I would say somewhere in the 90s, definitely was gone. And now, I don't know where it's going, but we live in a collision of cultures. And here's what we sometimes think. We think that we want to withdraw and form just a little Christian community and get in our own little cocoon so we can keep our kids and everybody else safe from the culture out there. And I understand the attraction to that. But brothers and sisters, that is not what God has called us to. God has called us to be a light to the nations. Just like the Israelites, he wanted to put them right in the middle of everything, where there's this collision of cultures. That's where he wants us. How can we win lost people to Christ, people who are dark in their minds, if we don't have any contact with them? Anybody? Now, I understand, believe me, I understand the pull of saying we want to, kind of cocoon ourselves and protect ourselves from all these evil influences. I understand that. There are ways to do that without withdrawing from culture. God has not called us to withdraw from culture. God has called us to influence culture. Remember, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, you are the light of the world. Not just to be the light of your own house and cocoon yourself and isolate yourself. No, God has not called us to be isolationists. He has called us to be the light of the world. He put his people then right at the crossroads of the earth. In fact, that's what Israel is often referred to, the crossroads of the earth. You can see once again from this map, I mean, it's right in the middle of all these empires. To go anywhere then, you had to follow this main trade route that went right through Israel. He wanted them there. He put them there on purpose. He could have put them anywhere else, but he didn't. He said, no, I want you here. Because this particular spot of land was vital to them achieving the purpose that God has for them. And God has a purpose for us too. Our purpose is not to cocoon ourselves. And so as we prepare to leave here, it's good for us to come together in our church building tonight and this Sunday morning as we celebrate the resurrection of the Lord. It's good for us to do that. That's biblical, actually. But we shouldn't do that just all the time. We also then need to go out into our communities where there's darkness. And there's plenty of it. And we need to be people who shine, who live differently, who think differently, and point people to something else than what they've been being pointed to by what they see and hear in regular society. That's what he's called us to. And I think this is a powerful message from what you see in the whole book of Joshua, because the whole book of Joshua is about we want to go in and we're going to conquer this piece of land right here, that piece of land, because that's where God wants us, and he wants us there for a reason, and it's to fulfill the mission and the purpose that he had for him. And the mission and purpose that God has for us is the same. It's just not tied to a particular piece of land. Any comments before we conclude tonight? Okay, next week we'll have a prayer service, and then, Lord willing, the week after that we'll continue back with another study in the book of Joshua. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it.